Jeffrey, you had mentioned to me yesterday about the Gemara that we had learned on Daf Daled about filling in the space if the sukkah is too tall. And that would seem to be a case of Tasev Leimin Asui, because what you're doing is filling in, fixing it after it's already made, after the schach is already there. So I did see that the commentaries do deal with that issue, and the way they answer, at least one of the ways of answering it, is that when the schach is too tall, it's too high up, it's not actually invalid. It's not completely invalid. Why? Because it's only where you stand that would cause it to be invalid. But if the floor of the sukkah is a little higher, then it no longer is invalid. So all you're doing is changing. In other words, even while the schach is too high, of course it's invalid for you to use, but you wouldn't call it a problem of Tasev Leimin Ha'asi, because you can't say the sukkah is an invalid sukkah. It's currently not usable because it's too high. But they don't consider that a situation of Tasev Leimin Ha'asui, because you're not really validating the sukkah. The sukkah is really valid, just at a higher location inside the sukkah.
Like it's in a tree.
You know what I mean?
Well, but you also have to be mavatal the material.
Yeah, well, that would
use.
Right. In other words, that would make it that the place where you're standing is not considered that it is not considered that you're just big or something. I'm a tall guy. So I'm a little higher up. No, in other words, it does go by your feet. Now, if you're standing on something that doesn't belong there, then it goes by where you should be standing. In other words, you do have to be mavatalit. You're right. Very good point. You do have to be mavatalit, but nevertheless, it does go by what the floor is, wherever the real floor is.
And didn't we read?
It's
a good subject to go back to. I want to ask more questions. There's more questions about that, because I think they also said that depending on where you put that the space around it that wasn't as high then could be used.
Right. Which also shows that the sukkah
is a valid sukkah.
That the sukkahs really could be valid. And I mean, I guess it's not 100% proof, because there's a concept of psal ha'yotze min ha'sukkah, which is a halach l'maisha misinai. So I guess it doesn't really prove anything, because psal ha'yotze min ha'sukkah works, But nevertheless, the idea there is not a contradiction to Tasev Leimin Ha'asi. It just doesn't apply there. That's not a good example of Tasev Leimin Ha'asi.
Thank you.
Thank you. That question. So it's a good point that you brought up, because it was we probably mentioned it then, and so of course it's hard.
But also we talked about a mavoy. Also because you could do a tikkun with a mavoy. Right, and I thought it was parallel to that. Remember we talked about the words. It says pasul, but with the mavoy it says
yemai.
Takain.
Right. But then again, what you're really doing there is not. It's not like you're fixing something that was already built. When you're yema'et it, you're actually rebuilding it. So that's a little, that's a little different. Not be the same concept of Tasev Leimin Ha'asui, where you remove some outside factor. Here, what you're doing is, what do you need to do? You need to lower the lechi, or the kaira. You have to lower the kaira. You have to make it lower. So what you're doing is putting a kaira on. You're actually physically putting a kaira on. It's not like you're changing some external factor. Really, again, there also you don't have this concept of Tasev Leimin.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. Good morning. The workmen are coming to.
Let me just mute it.
Complete our room. Hi.
Good morning.
Okay. Now that we've muted everyone, I think it's clear. It's quiet. Okay, so we are on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, and what we have been dealing with is Dachui, the concept of dochui by mitzvahs. It's a concept of that dochui is something that's invalid. What's interesting is it's really similar to this concept of kasev v'leimen asi. They're actually two very similar concepts. That dochui means it's pushed aside, and once it's pushed aside, you might no longer be able to use it, even if the reason it was pushed aside is no longer there. Nevertheless, once it's pushed aside, it can no longer be used. And we see such a concept by kodshim, by the laws of sacrifices, that once it's the mizbeach is not valid and the carbon was supposed to be brought, you can't bring it. Now, once you fix the mizbeach, you still can't bring that carbon. It's pushed aside. That sacrifice is no longer valid, pushed aside, and why? Because we have a concept of once something is pushed aside, it is forever pushed aside. And the question is, does that apply to mitzvahs? So that concept of dochui is similar to the concept of tasev v'leimen asui. Tasev v'leimen asui means once you do it in the wrong way, you can't just change an external thing and then it's automatically fixed. You can't, in other words, it's pushed aside. What you did is not valid. You can't just fix something and say, oh, now I did it right. No, you didn't do it right. You changed some external thing. But in order to really do things properly, you need to redo it. You can't just fix something external. And the example I gave was if you build a sukkah under a tree and then you chop down the tree. So you built it in an invalid way. You can't say I made the sukkah, I made a kosher sukkah. No, you didn't. You fixed some external thing by removing the tree, but you didn't actually build it. You would need to redo the schach in order to make that sukkah a kosher sukkah. And that's tasev v'leimen asi, which is similar. Why do I say it's similar? Because the concept is it was pushed aside. It was not valid the way you made it. And we tell you, even though problem, it's not good, right? It's a similar idea, but it's a different case. Why is it a different case? Because tasev v'leimen asi is by a mitzvah that has an action that you need to do it, and when you do it, you got to do it right. And if you fix an external thing, it doesn't work. And the concept of dochui is that once something is pushed aside, it's not valid. Then we just say that you can no longer use that no matter what. It's somewhat of a or I guess once it's less logical. Tasev v'leimen asi I could understand. It wasn't made properly. You need to make it. If you make it in a wrong way, you have to remake it. You have to make it properly. The concept of dochui is that you can't use it. No, that's the rule. You can't use it. No, it's not usable.
So I personally like not to put on the schach till the last item. There's so many other things, and when we take whatever we have from our own yard, and we keep it aside on a bush, and then I would say, if anyone's helping me, whatever, I said, now you can put some of the schach on. You help me with this and this, the bracing, whatever is necessary. Now you can put a piece of schach on also, and we do that the last thing, and right, instead of as soon as you get the framework, a lot of people
right. Definitely has to be done last, because otherwise it's the sukkah is possibly not a valid sukkah, and then you're putting on schach on a non-valid sukkah, and then you're making it valid, and that would be a problem of tasev v'leimen asi. Again, that's not the issue of dochui, that's the issue of tasev v'leimen asi. Okay. Anyway, so we were dealing with this issue here, and interesting Gemara. The Gemara tried to bring proofs, and we had cases over here of the covering over the blood, which is an interesting source, because basically what it's saying is that when you cover over if the wind covered over the blood, then you sort of lose your mitzvah. But if the wind blows away, if the wind covers over the blood, meaning if the wind blows earth on top of the blood, it would remove your mitzvah. You no longer can fulfill the mitzvah of covering the blood, because the wind blew the earth there, and yet we see that if the wind blows it off it, Then, it blew it on it, blew the earth on the blood, and then it blew it off it. Then the law would be that you do have a mitzvah. So you see that ein dichui yetzel mitzvahs. We don't say once it's pushed off, it's completely pushed off. Again, the concept of being pushed off here is that your mitzvah is pushed off. How is your mitzvah pushed off? Because the wind covered the blood, and now you no longer have a mitzvah, and maybe that would mean that you can no longer do the mitzvah anymore. And the Gemara says, no, you can do the mitzvah still, because the halacha is if the wind blows off the earth after it blew it on it, it blew it off it, then you redo it yourself. You can do it yourself. That means there's no dichui. But the Gemara says, you know what? We don't know if Rav Papa and the opinion that says this, if when they said there's no dichui, do they mean that as a definite, or do they mean to say we're not sure, and therefore you should cover it over? In other words, we don't know if this law is a absolute law, is it a definite law, or is it a law because we're not sure what to do, we tell you to cover it over. Which basically means we're not sure if there's dichui by mitzvahs or there's no dichui by mitzvahs. So that's what our Gemara is dealing with. Is there, we definitely have reason to say, ein dichui yetzel mitzvahs, that you still have a mitzvah afterward, that we don't push aside mitzvahs, but we don't know if that's only said in a case of like a chumrah, if it's a case, we don't know if that's a definite, or is it just a way of acting because of a suffix, because of a dilemma. And that's where the Gemara is dealing with this. And then the Gemara brings a brisa of our Velikton. The Gemara brings a brisa that where you removed these berries on Yom Tov, and it's a machlokes if it's going to be kosher. What happened was you have hadassim. The hadassim do have sometimes berries on them, and if there's more berries than leaves, our Mishnah, which was on page 32b, the previous page, the Mishnah said, if shahayu anavav merubais me'olav, the grapes of it, the berries are more than the leaves, it is puzzle. V'miaton kosher. If you made them less, you would make it kosher. So you need to make it a minority berries, majority leaves. That's what you need to make it. And you can't do that on Yom Tov. But anyway, if you, the brisa here talks about what happens if you did it on Yom Tov. And we have an argument between Rabbi Eliezer, Reb Tzadok, and the rabbis that you did this aveira of removing them on Yom Tov. So Rabbi Eliezer, Reb Tzadok says that it's possible to use that lulav, and the chachamim are machshir. The chachamim say it's kosher. So this is, I must tell you that it's not rare to have hadassim with berries. If you look at some of the hadassim that they sell, even with the hechsherim on them, there often are some little berries connected to a like another shoot that comes out of, like a little branch that comes out of the hadas branch, and it has berries on it. It has a berry on it. It's not uncommon. But the halacha is that it's at least the Mishnah tells us that the rule is that it has to be majority. As long as the majority leaves and minority berries, it's kosher. Now,
are they edible?
I've never tried, but I don't think so. Now, the Gemara, the brisa here that we just brought is an argument between Reb Eliezer, Reb Tzadok, and the rabbis if it's kosher. So again, you used invalid hadassim, and then you removed them and you kashered them after the fact. So the question is, why would it be usur? To say it's permissible, well, it's now permissible, right? It is kosher. It's in a kosher state now. But what could be the reasons to make it invalid? So if we think about it, without looking in the Gemara, you could have a number of ideas, reasons why it would be invalid. Number one, again, it's kosher now, but still maybe you can't use it. Why not? So we have an issue of dichui, which is the way the Gemara wants to explain it, the initial way the Gemara wants to explain it. It was pushed aside. It used to have too many berries on it. So it's pushed aside. Once it's pushed aside, maybe you can no longer use it. So that's first option. That's one reason why it might be a problem. Another reason why it might be a problem would be tasev leimena asui. You made it in an improper way. It's supposed to, lulav is supposed to be made, which would be based on the fact that you have to make a eget, a bundle. You have to make it into a bundle, according to that opinion, right? Would follow that view. If you need to make a bundle out of the lulav, and you made it in an improper way, and then you just fix something afterwards by plucking off some of those berries, but it was made in an improper way. And according to one opinion, or some opinions, you need to make the lulav. And if you need to make it, you need to make it in a kosher way, not just make it in an in-kosher way and then somehow fix something that's fix some external thing afterwards. So you need to make it in a kosher way. If you didn't, that would be a reason why it's invalid. So that would be another point. So it would be tasa v'loimen ha'asui. What other reason could we explain that that would be the problem here?
It's a tikkun on Yom Tov.
So you mitzvah ba'avera, mitzvah that you did. In other words, for sure it's a problem what you did, but why would it be puzzled to use? That's what I'm saying. Why is it invalid to use?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it would be. But my question is this. A lot of times we receive these leaves and now they're packaged separately, and you cut the tops of the bags so you can take them out on Yom Tov, and you don't necessarily examine them. And so if you take the hadassim out on the morning of Sukkot, out of the bag that was keeping it fresh in, you had the bag cut before Yom Tov, so you'll be able to access it. And then you find that there's the berry. Like, you didn't give yourself the chance before Yom Tov. So maybe you could use a shinui in some way.
Mm-hmm. So you want to say if this would be a rabbinic law of tikkun, which, okay, well, we'll have to wait a little to see about the tikkun, what the prohibition is. So let's hold off on that. But the concept that it's a mitzvah ba'avera, I did bring up yesterday, that could be another issue here, why it might be a problem. Again, we're trying to figure out what the exact problem is, according to Rebbe Elazar Tzaddik, and what the reason why the rabbis permit it. Now, once you say there's a problem, so if you say the problem is dichui, that once something's not usable for a mitzvah, you can't use it anymore, then what do the rabbis hold? The rabbis would hold that you can use it more. That, in other words, this would be the argument of yesh dichui or ein dichui. Now, if you want to say the problem is tasev v'leimena asui, then what do the other rabbis say? The rabbis would say it's not a problem of tasev v'leimena asui, that you made it he's saying you made it in an inappropriate way. What do the rabbis hold? The rabbis either hold you don't have to make it in the first place, because either the rabbis would hold you don't have to make an eget, you don't need to tie it in the first place. So if you don't need to tie it in the first place, there's no problem of tasev v'leimena asui in this scenario, because there's no mitzvah to make it. The other option is they hold it is a mitzvah to make a bundle. Nevertheless, they hold there's no mitzvah of tasev v'leimena asui by the lulav, because it doesn't say tasa. The rule of you make it in the right way, it doesn't say the word tasa by lulav. It says it by sukkah, that you have to make the sukkah, but it doesn't say it by lulav. So there's two ways of explaining the rabbis, right, why it's not a problem. But according to the Elazar Reb Tzadok, the way of explaining him would be because it's an issue either of dichui or it's an issue of tasev v'leimena asui. So we have these two understandings here, and basically the Gemara does not deal with mitzvah haba ba'avera. Now, the reason why the Gemara doesn't deal with mitzvah haba ba'avera is because the Gemara is understanding that there's no question. Mitzvah ba'avera is not an issue at all. There's no problem of the fact that you took it off on Yom Tov, which you shouldn't have, but you did. You took it off on Yom Tov. That's not an issue of mitzvah that now you can't use it. It doesn't ruin it. Because you did an avera with it by taking it off, that's not the reason, that's not going to be a cause of mitzvah ba'avera. And basically it has something to do with the fact that the actual mitzvah is not being done at the same moment that you took off, that you did the avera. You know, it's a avera was done and a mitzvah was done, but the mitzvah and the avera were not done at the same time. So that would be one of the explanations why it's not a mitzvah above avera. The commentaries do talk about it. It is discussed why the Gemara doesn't bring that up, but that's not one of the issues here. So anyway, so we've now seen this law of dichoy. We've seen this law of tasev loymena asui, and then the Gemara said that
Rabbi,
yes,
and I looked up. It says myrtle berries are edible. There are small dark fruits that grow on the myrtle bush, which is native to the Mediterranean region. They have a sweet and slightly tart flavor similar to blueberries. They can be eaten fresh or dried, and they're often used in Mediterranean cuisine to add flavor to dishes. It also has traditional medicine effects, rich in antioxidants, fiber, vitamin C, other nutrients.
okay.
You can eat them fresh, right off the plant.
Okay.
I wonder if you have to wait for what's it called, the first 3 years you can't eat what's it called?
That's why all this stuff is here.
Wondering about the laws of Arla.
Yeah, Orla.
So I would think that they're not planted for the fruit. They're planted for use as for the mitzvah. Because the fruits probably don't sell so it's such a high price, but the leaves, the branches sell for a very nice price, and they can sell a lot of them. So if it's not planted for that purpose, I don't know if the laws of Arla apply. You know what I mean? Because there's rules if it's planted as a fence instead of as a tree for fruit, things like that. So if I'm not mistaken, it might be based on that. If it's not planted for fruit, the laws of Arla might not apply.
What if it's planted for medicinal purposes?
So that might be considered you're planting it for the berries. I'm not sure. Again, I'd have to look up the Mishnayos in Arla and the rules of Arla. But
very interesting.
Yeah, but there are leniencies. There are rules of, especially outside Israel. There's leniencies of the rules of with the rules of Arla. It's Arla Schutzlarts. There's more leniencies. If there's an argument about it, then we can rely on the lenient view in Schutzlarts. So anyway, but we could look it up and see if there's any rules about that. Okay, so anyway, getting back to our discussion here, the Gemara said, why does Rabbi Yehuda hold? The Gemara gets into this lulav tzarech eget or not. Does the lulav need to be tied? And the Gemara says the reason why you would need to tie it is because it says lakicha. It says lakicha, and the lakicha by the carbon Pesach in Mitzrayim. Again, when they left Mitzrayim, what was the one of the two mitzvahs that they had to do was, one was Milah, they had to circumcise themselves. The other one was the carbon Pesach. They had to bring this lamb, mishchu k'chulachem tzoyim mishbechaysechem shachtu Pesach. They had to slaughter the Pesach. What was that? They took the blood and put it on. They slaughtered this lamb and they took it tied it to their bedpost for 4 days, from the 10th of Nisan until the 14th. Then they slaughtered it on the 14th of Nisan, and then they slaughtered it, and then that night they were meant to partake of it, and of course before they partook of it, they put the blood. They sprinkled the blood on the doorposts and on their lintel, and there are sources that they mix the blood with the blood of the milah, of the circumcision, and put both bloods on the doorposts and on the lintel. But anyway, the pasuk talks about the blood of the carbon Pesach, that they put the blood on and Hashem then jumped over their houses, and that's the term Pesach comes from. So that was how did they put it on their doorposts? They used this hyssop that they dipped into the blood, and then they touched that hyssop onto the doorpost and on the lintel. And how did they? How many bunches did they use? Or how did they use this? So that they used 3 branches or bundles, branches of this hyssop, and they tied it together. So it uses the word lakicha. So the same thing applies to the lulav. That would be the reason that it has to be tied, is because we learn it from the agudas ezov that it had to be tied, and therefore now that concept of tying is Rabbi Yehuda. The rabbis argued with him and said you don't have to. They said bein agud, bein she'eino agud, whether it's tied or not tied, whether it's tied together or not, it's kosher and doesn't need to be tied. Now Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to be tied. He learns from these psukim, from the word lakachtem. So it's some type of a gzer shava, that lakicha, and the rabbis didn't have such a tradition, and therefore they didn't hold of it. Now the Gemara does say afterwards that it's not like the rabbis don't hold you should tie it together. You should, because there's a brisa that says it's a mitzvah liyoigda. It's a mitzvah to do it, but if you didn't do it, it's okay. And it can't be Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says if you didn't do it, it's not okay. So it must be the rabbis. So the Gemara understands the rabbis also hold it's a mitzvah to do it, but it's not intrinsic of the mitzvah of lulav that has to be tied. It's not learned from the kachtem. It's an extra mitzvah because you're supposed to beautify the mitzvahs. Zek keli v'anveyu, and zek keli v'anveyu is in this week's parsha. We read that the Bnei Yisrael, when they sang the shira of the Yam, shira, the song at the sea, so they pray. They said all these praises, which we say in davening every day. And one of the things they said was Zek Keli v'anveyu alakei avi b'ramimenu. This is Keli. This is my God, and I will beautify him, and which means I'll beautify his mitzvahs. I will do them with not just to get away with it, not just to wing it, but to do it nicely, to do it out of love, to do it with to show that it's being done with beauty. And Elokei Avi by Remimeno, the God of my father, and I will exalt him. And so this mitzvah of Zekeli V'Aveyu is in general applies to all mitzvahs, that you're supposed to beautify the mitzvahs for Hashem, and the same thing would apply to a lulav. So does a lulav need to be tied together with the hadassim and the aravos? So the answer is, well, it should be. Because it's Zekeli V'Aveyu. If it's not, it's kosher. But it should be tied together because mitzvah of Zek, because of beautifying the mitzvahs. And the Gemara learns from here that you're supposed to do hidur mitzvah. That Zekeli V'Aveyu teaches us that you're supposed to, if you have 2 mezuzahs and you have one that's more beautiful, you should use the more beautiful one. Why? Zekeli V'Aveyu. This is my God, I'm supposed to beautify him. The Gemara asks, how much are you supposed to pay to beautify the mitzvah? Because, you could buy a $50 mezuzah, you could buy a $100 mezuzah or a $200 mezuzah. So how much are you supposed to pay to beautify the mitzvah? The Gemara says ad shlish, until a third. It means you're supposed to really pay up to a third more. Now, some people want to do the beautify the mitzvahs even extra. That's great, but up to a shlish, up to a third, is the obligation of Zekeli V'Anveyu. It's this mitzvah of Zekeli V'Anveyu. Anyway, bottom line is that our Gemara was talking about if the top of the hadas was clipped off, and some type of a berry grew on the top, or so somehow it made it that it's no longer clipped. It's no longer looks clipped. It's now looks good. So the Mishnah said if it's clipped, it's invalid. Ula Bar Chanina said if it's something grows there, it's kosher. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, when does that apply? Maybe it doesn't always apply because maybe there's dichlui etzel mitzvahs. That was the discussion that we just went through. That could be that Ula's statement only applies before Yontiv. If you already grew back, then it's kosher. But if it's on Yontiv, it grew back, then it could be a problem. Or after you tied it together already, then it grew back. That could be a problem. So that's really where we left off. The Gemara concluded really with the word teku, that tishbi taretz kushiyas v'bais. The Gemara really answered teku, but then the Gemara tried again, but wasn't satisfied with the teku. Interestingly enough, the Gemara sort of jumped right back into it and said, Leima kitanoi. Let's say this is a machlekes tanaim. The Gemara initially just said teku. We don't know. We're not sure. But then the Gemara said, no, maybe this is a machlekes. Maybe we have a machlekes about it. And the Gemara answered that no, it's not necessarily a machlekes about the dichloi. So we don't know for sure. We don't know. We don't have clarity on the law of dichloi by mitzvahs. Now we're gonna go to the next Gemara. We're 3 lines from the bottom of the page, and we're on 33a. 33a, 3 lines from the bottom of the page. So the Gemara says, "Oisha hayu anavav merubin." The Mishnah had said if the berries were more majority than the leaves, then it's invalid. Amar Rav Chizda. Chizda said, "Davar zeh, this thing, Rabbeinu Hagadol Amroi." Rav said this thing. Hashem should help him. Hashem should save him, so to speak. Loi shanu, we didn't learn this law that it's invalid. Ella b'makam echad, only if it's in one place. Now,
Rabbi.
Yeah.
I have a picture.
You have a picture of the leaves and of the majority berries?
Yes.
Show it. Well, we'll take us a moment. Okay.
Rebbe, you can keep going while he fidgets. That's all. The worst that's going to happen is your face is not going to be there. It'll be a picture there, but
Okay,
you see it?
No, we don't. Okay, I'm just going to continue until it's shown. Thank you, Isaac. Yeah, good point. So this is Rabbeinu Hagadol Rav. They call him the Great Rabbi. Rav said this, and what is the statement? The statement is that this law only applies ela b'makam echad, only if in one place of the hadas, that's where you have majority of the majority is the berries more than leaves. Aval, but bishnayim, oy, shloisha, mekaymais kosher. But if it's in 2 or 3 places, then it will be kosher. Amar le Rava, and Rava said and asks, shnayim ushloisha mekaymais avi menumar. If it is 2 or 3 places, that would be a problem of menumar, that it is speckled. It is a leopard. Number is a leopard. It's like speckled, and that would be a problem. Upasul, and that should make it not beautiful. Should be considered invalid. And so Ella e itmar. So the Gemara says, rather, if we learn this, in other words, we have to explain this statement differently. E itmar. Learned it, if it was said as follows. In other words, Rav Chizda's statement, it must have been a little different than we said it. What is this? What's the new way of that? So the Mishnah said, Oisho hayu anavav merubin meyalav is puzzle. So the Mishnah said that if the berries were more than the leaves, it is invalid. Amar Rav Chizda, and Rav Chizda said, "Davar zeh Rabbeinu Hagadol Amaroi, v'hamakam yeh be'ezroi." the great Rav said this, and Hashem should help him. Lo shanu, it was not taught that it's invalid. Ella anavav shchayres. It only applies if the berries are black. Aval anavav yerukais. But if the berries are some type of a green, yarek doesn't always mean literal green. It could mean like a yellowish or other the different terms the Gemara uses for yarek. But it basically is something from the family of. So if the berries are that color, meaning the hadas kosher, it is a type of hadas. It doesn't look strange. It looks beautiful. It's not a problem, and it'll be kosher. Now we're going to see this picture over here that David just showed us. That looks like blueberry. That does not look like a hadas tree. I don't know. That doesn't look like a myrtle. And they're not the blueberries. They're not the berries that I'm used to seeing.
It says that it's myrtle.
Yeah. I don't know. I've seen berries, but those look like blueberries, no?
It says that myrtle branch with few leaves and many berries.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it looks different than I'm.
That's why it's worthy of a picture, Rebbe.
Yeah.
If it was the one you saw, you don't have a picture of it.
What do you mean? I'm sure you've seen as well. They're normally very small, tiny little things sticking out of the hadassim.
And that's why they're kosher.
Right.
Yeah, but these ones are the
non-kosher ones. These are the
Right.
Uh-huh.
These are the ones where the berries are more numerous than the leaves.
Uh-huh. Right. Okay. Right. It just looks so it looks so much not like a hadas that it's almost like you wouldn't even think of using it. But anyway, okay. So thank you, David, for showing us the Steinsaltz edition over here. Okay, so let's go. So back to our Gemara here. So the Gemara basically is saying that we have to be careful that the hadassim are what you call hadar. Hadar means beautiful, and when it comes to the laws of the arba minim, the four species, it says the word hadar. Now hadar, it says by the esrog, but the Gemara understands it to be not only by esrog, it has to be hadar beautiful, but it applies to all the other four species. They all have to be beautiful. And what would be something that would ruin it from being beautiful if the leaves are green and the grapes, the berries are black? That would be a problem. So this is the understanding that we have now, that's when it makes a problem. But if the berries would be green or from the family of green, that wouldn't be a problem. So that's what the way the Gemara is restating the statement of Rav Chizda that he was quoting from Rav. Now, the Gemara continues and says, Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, Adumais keshchayres damir. That the red are, if they're red, they're similar to black. And what's the halacha with red then? If they're similar to black, then they are invalid, because the only ones that are good are the yerukais, because they do not look like speckled. They make it look, they fit, they match, the colors match. But the black doesn't match the green. The black is different than the green, and therefore it's going to look speckled. It's going to look not appropriate. It's going to look not hadar, not beautiful. And so, but if it's red, it's also a problem. Adumais is keshchayres damyon. Red is similar to black, and if there's too many red ones, it's also puzzle. And the reason is because it is it's not hadar. Now, Rashi tells us that. So what is it? Do the berries just have many different colors, and sometimes they're invalid or sometimes they're valid? No. Rashi says they start off with the green, but then as they get older, they get black, and therefore they, this is not like some weird type of tree that has many different types of berries of all different colors. It's a tree that they have green berries, but the green berries, after they get old, after they dry out, they get black. Now, what about the red? So the red, it seems that it gets red, and after it's red, it's dries out more, it gets more black. So the Gemara said, Rav Papa said that the rule of red is similar to black. The Amar Rav Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina said, "Hai dam shachar adamhu ela shalach." Rav Chanina says, the blood, it is black. The black blood, it really is started out red, but because it was, I guess, subject to oxygen or whatever, subject to being to drying out, the color changes to black. So the same thing is that the berries of the myrtle branch, if they're red, it's basically the beginning of being black, and it really follows the same rule as black. Of course, this is a very interesting comparison. What is Rav Chanina talking about? Rav Chanina is talking about a law about nida. The laws of nida, a woman who has blood coming from her uterus, so she is considered a nida. The rabbis are always concerned, or the halacha is always, it's always of concern. How do you know if this is blood coming from the uterus, or if it's just a cut that she has? Because basically, if a woman is menstruating, you obviously know that she's tamei, she's a nida. But what about if she's not really menstruating a lot, but there's just some blood, and then how do you know where it's from? So the rabbis were able to tell there were 5 colors of blood that the rabbis would know if it's from the uterus or if it's from just a cut. Anyone could get a cut on the seat, get a cut in the flesh. That's not blood from the source, from the uterus, and therefore she would not be tamei. Now nowadays we don't really know all these colors, but one of the 5 colors was black, and black was basically the reason why that would be invalid is because really it's only red blood that's tamei, that's impure. Nevertheless, black used to be red, and the reason why black is invalid because it was red. And the other nowadays the rabbis don't know the difference between the 4 colors of red, so we basically consider everything invalid if in other words, everything we suspect that it might be from the uterus if it's red. Obviously, people do bring things for the Rav to check to see if it's because the Rabbanim have a certain clarity on how red is red, and what because of course if it's bright red, you're not going to bring it to the Rav. But sometimes things are a little unclear, like a dark yellow or something like that. Different colors that person would show to a Rav to see if their wife is tamei, or if it's considered blood from the source, and she would be a nida. So that's the case of Rav Chanina. It's talking about the blood of a woman if it's considered dam tamei, dam blood that's impure. Now Rav Papa is connecting it to the Hadassim law. Now the question is, it doesn't seem so connected, because by Hadas it depends on the beauty of it. Is it beautiful or is it not beautiful? Is it considered hadar or not hadar? So it is an interesting comparison that the Gemara brings from the laws of of nida, that the dam is really black, black. I'm sorry, black. Something that's black really used to be red, but it got ruined. So the same thing would be the leaves, the berries of the hadas, the red. Really, it's the same as black. Not necessarily. Who says they're the same as black? When it comes to the laws of nida, fine, black and red are basically the same. But when it comes to the laws of hadar, beauty, who says that it's the same? I understand it comes one comes from the other. That black does come from red, and I understand that the berries that started out, red, they at one stage they're red. They turn black when they dry.
And if anything, it's old, so it might not be considered hadar.
No, the black is old.
Right.
The red maybe not.
Right.
So the red maybe should be kosher. So I'm what I'm asking on the Gemara is that how does Rav Papa compare? Say, oh, you know what? The red is considered like black. Why? Because we have a law by nida that red is like black. Not necessarily. Maybe red should be kosher. Maybe red should be kosher. And when it turns black, then it would be a problem. If it turns black, that was the example he gave. That when it's black, it's a problem because it's menumer. It's not hadar. It's not beautiful. It looks speckled. But maybe if it was, it started out green. Green was okay, we said. Now, the question really is it green that's kosher and everything else is invalid? Or is it black that's invalid and everything else is kosher? That's really the question. In other words, what does he say? He says, only black is invalid. That's the way he says it, right? What did we say? Lo yishanu ela shchayros, anov shchayros. But Yeruka is fine. Now, so the question really is, what is he saying when he says that? He says the black is the problem. The question is, what do you mean? The black is the problem. What about when they were red? They were red before they were black. Why are you jumping to the case of black and not mentioning red? That seemingly red should also be a problem. And they should already be invalid from when they were red. And so Rav Papa seems to be explaining that, you know why he said black? Because black and red go together. And that's what it seems to something along those lines, that Rav Papa is bothered with the fact that why is he jumping to black? So he's explaining he's jumping to black because black and red are basically the same. They basically have the same rules. We see in other places they basically have the same rules. So therefore he jumped to black. Therefore he says black, but really it includes red. I don't know. The question is, does this apply to other colors? We have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch. Maybe we'll take a look tomorrow in Shulchan Aruch what it says in Shulchan Aruch. But I will mention that the Avnei Nezer does mention an interesting thing here. He says, you know why red is invalid? Because it's going to turn black. That's why it's invalid. And according to the Avnei Nezer, then you understand a little better the Gemara. In other words, why is he's only saying black, but really red should be kosher. Really red should be kosher. But because it's going to turn black, Rav Papa says, nope, red you also can't use because it's going to turn black, and that's going to be a problem. And
It's on its way.
But it's on its way. Well, yeah.
Yeah, green's also going to turn black.
Right. Except that it seems that the time frame of the red to black.
Right. It's on its way. It's really moving.
Time frame. In other words, it could last green for a long time, but when it turns red, it's turning black soon. And so therefore, according to that, it actually it makes the Gemara a little more understandable. That Rav was saying that black is the problem. That's the issue. When it's red, it's not an Ikra Adin. The halacha is that black is a problem. That's called spotted. Any other color is not necessarily, no. Black is a problem. Rav Papa comes along and says, true, that's right, that may ikar hadin, from the essence, from the essential law, black is really the problem. But red, we are going to consider to be like black because it's about to lead to black, and you're going to end up using a hadas that might be invalid. We're going to tell you now, don't use it. Don't use it now. Why not? Because we are protecting you from not either you making bracha on an invalid lulav, or from invalid hadas, or from not that you might not fulfill the mitzvah, and so on. And therefore, we are prohibiting you from using the red. Yes, Jeffrey.
So, but this shouldn't be dichoy because it's not black yet. So why not use it the first day with the red, and then on the second day when it's not a problem, originally at least, and then peel them off the second day.
Right. So Gemara, what we've seen, and this is not the first time, that there are scenarios where the rabbis prohibited you to do a mitzvah with something that's valid because you're going to end up possibly doing it wrong or not fulfilling it. So the rabbis, in one of the examples we had before, was like you have a sukkah made out of an animal. The animal is one wall, but the animal is going to leave.
It's going to move.
It's going to move, and then it's going to stuck either without a sukkah later, or you're going to end up, basically, we prohibit you, even though it's a kosher sukkah, but we prohibit you from using it because of what's going to happen later. So we have similar. We had once or twice another other similar laws that are connected to that. So here's another case, according to the Avnei Nezer, that's the understanding here. And what he's trying to answer is like, how do you read the Gemara otherwise? Because as I was mentioning, what's the problem? Is if it's spotted, it's a problem. So then any color should be a problem. How do you learn the Gemara? Does it have to be green to be kosher? So then any color should be invalid. Or if it's only black that's not kosher, so then why is red considered like black? Just because when it comes to the laws of Nida, it's the same. It must be that because red is going to turn to black, as we see by Nida, red turns to that, blood turns to black, and here also it's the leaves are going to turn to black. So therefore, there's reason to be machmir with this red, because it's going to turn to black, and that would be something that's invalid. Okay, so that's Avnei's explanation, and sort of makes it more understandable. Now, the Gemara continues and says, "Im miaton kosher." If you remove them, it is kosher. So here, we're going to see something interesting here, where the Gemara, it does go back to the question that we thought we decided was teku, and the Gemara now goes back to it, at least in part. So the Gemara says, if you remove the abundance of those berries, that now you only have a minimal amount of them, it's kosher. That's what the Mishnah had said. So the Gemara asks, when did you remove these berries? If it means that it's before you tied the lulav with the hadassim and aravos, that's when you remove the berries. Pshita, of course, the hadas is going to be kosher. Why should it be a problem? You want to say tasev leimena also because you made it in an invalid way, and now you want to correct it after the fact. That's not true, because you really removed the berries before you attached it. So when you made the binding, when you bound the lulav with the hadassim, you had already removed them. If it's talking about that you removed them before the binding, so then that's not a problem, and there's no problem of dichui because it was never called a mitzvah in the first place. Before you tied it together, it's not Yom Tov yet, and there's no mitzvah on it. So why is there an issue here that why would the Mishnah have to tell us that if you remove the berries, it's kosher? It's obvious that it's kosher if you remove them before you even tied it, before you tied it together. Rather, it must be talking about that you tied the lulav together with the other species, and then you removed the hadassim berries in order to kasher now the hadassim. But the problem is you already made it. You already made it, and now the Mishnah says it's kosher. Not a problem. You already attached everything together, and you removed the berries. No problem. It's kosher. So what do you see from there? The Gemara says, this is a case where, from the first moment, it was pushed aside for the mitzvah, and you made in other words, you had made this bundle, and it wasn't valid, and now you're fixing it. And it's kosher. The Mishnah says it's kosher. Miyata. And we can't say that it's talking about that you removed the berries before you tied it together, because that would be obvious. It must be after you tied it together. So what we see is there's no problem of tasev leimena asu here, which is not surprising, because it could be that tasev leimena asu, that rule only applies to sukkah. It does not apply to lulav, which we saw a little before. We've seen that before. That it could be that that's not an issue at all. That so you tied it together, you bound it together, and afterwards you removed the berries. Okay, no problem, because there's no law, or possibly there's no mitzvah to tie it together. Maybe so. You could get away without a problem of tasev leimena asi. That's not an issue. But what we do say is this is a case where it initially was not valid, and we said you can't use that lulav. You tied it together. It had too many berries. We already pushed it off from saying, nope, that's not a proper lulav. It's dichui me'ikara from the beginning, from the outset. And tifshait mina, let us answer from this our dilemma. That what dichui me'ikara loy havi dichui. That's something that's not valid in the first place, and then it becomes valid afterwards. That's okay. It's not pushed off. We don't push it off forever. It's fit to be used as a mitzvah. If you remove the problem, you can now use it for a mitzvah. The Gemara before said teku, and now the Gemara is saying we have an answer. So the Gemara says, "Oilam basar diag." Really, we're talking about you already tied it together. Because savar, and we hold eged hazmana bialma. That eged, tying together, is only a preparation for the mitzvah to be done in its time. Bihazmana ba'alma lav plumhi, who that this hazmana, this preparation that you did, it's not considered the mitzvah of lulav, and therefore you can't say that it's considered an invalid lulav. Why can't you say it's an invalid lulav and it's a dichui? Because why? Because it was only you didn't really make it's not like yet the holiday yet. It's not Yom Tov yet. It's just all you have is a lulav, which was tied together, which is a preparation for a mitzvah. It's not the actual mitzvah. So the Gemara here is pushing off this proof, but don't be turned off. The Gemara will bring another short. Tomorrow we'll see the next proof where the Gemara will be able to successfully prove it. So we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rebbe. Take care.
Sure.